Hello, Joaquin. This is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn for AskGM.com, and I will be analyzing your game today. So let's take a look. After the moves e4, d6, d4, knight f6, you played the move bishop d3. This is not the most popular move, but you're going to transpose the game to King's Indian, which is totally fine. And after e5, d5, this is pretty much King's Indian. Black has an option to play g6. In the game, your opponent chose to put the bishop on e7, which is just as fine. You played h3. I like that move. Prophylactics against knight g4 or bishop g4 in the future. Castles bishop e3, c6, c4. And this is a typical King's Indian setup with the pawns on c4, d5, and e4. So far, so good. Knight a6, knight c3, knight c5. And here, I think, is the first critical moment of the game. I think you made a slight inaccuracy by playing the move b4. As the game showed, your opponent didn't really know how to take advantage of this inaccuracy when you gave up the bishop pair. But actually, I think much better move is to simply drop the bishop to c2. Why? Well, we know that with the two bishops, right, if the game opens up, black may get an advantage. So that's why you, even though the bishop is not active, you keep the bishop on the board for the time to come, right? If the game ever opens up, if he ever tries to play for f5 or, takes and try to get b5 going, you really need that bishop for the future. So I think it's a slight inaccuracy. And the second reason why I think it's a slight inaccuracy is because in these types of King's Indian structures, black is cramped, right? With every trade, black has more space for his minor pieces. So for instance, when he was able to trade off this knight after you played b4, queen takes, now this knight, right, has a little bit more space, and if the knight ever goes to h5, he's going to have three minor pieces as opposed to this knight on b4, which in the future could end up going to a6 or d7, blocking that bishop on c8. So I think it's a slight inaccuracy, but not a big mistake. So I think so far, so good. You try to lock things up. g4 is the right idea. Knight f4 is correct. And here we have an interesting position. What's better, two knights or the two bishops? I actually think this is roughly equal. And white's idea here is to try to lock things up as much as you can. And black really needs to open up the game. So both sides are playing well so far. f3 is good. You need to really lock up that center. Bishop h4 check. As it turned out in the game, it actually favored you. You came up with this brilliant idea to play king f1 and then transfer the rook over to c2 and win a lot of time. So I actually think this is a mistake by black. He should have tried something natural like bishop d7, rook c8, put the bishop on e5. And again, the game is roughly equal. Neither side has any breakthroughs, and you have to be careful about the f5 idea in the future. So far, so good. You managed to get this really beautiful idea. I like this rook h2, rook c2 transfer. And now I think white is totally fine. He played this odd-looking move, rook e5, which I'm not quite sure what the idea is. And after knight d1, my guess is you want to open up the c file, possibly transfer the knight over to c4, where you could be hitting the rook and the queen. He played the move f5. This is the second critical moment of the game. So obviously, white hopes that after pawn takes, bishop takes, you're going to take back, and he's simply going to mate you. And good job for seeing this tactic, although it's not that difficult. But there's a flaw in his thinking that you actually might have missed as well. After pawn takes, so instead of rook c7, after pawn takes, bishop takes, I tell my students, chess is not checkers. You don't have to take back. You don't have to take that bishop on f5. Here, white has a really strong move. Knight b2. And it turns out that you cover the e1 square, so the bishop is hanging, and you set up a second threat, that fork on the rook and the queen, and white's completely winning. I think you're going to win material, honestly. So this was a nice little, you can say intermezzo type of move, but quiet move that basically refutes black's idea. So you played rook c7, which looks okay too. He takes, pawn takes, and now he drops back. knight f3. I think white is still doing great. This is a nice square for the knight. He plays bishop g3, and as long as I have 2 squares under control, you have nothing to worry about, and you correctly trade queens, right? His only try is to try to get some kind of attack going against your king, and the endgame, I think, favors you. And here, we're getting close to the next critical moment in the game. Here, he simply blunders with rook d8. This is a move that I think loses the game on the spot. Now, the only fighting move here is if he plays the move bishop e8, and I actually think black still has enough counterplay. For instance, if you take the pawn, he's going to take the a pawn, and if you try to double up, honestly, this is not such a big deal after bishop g6 takes king h8. You don't really have as much firepower to checkmate him. In the meantime, you have to be careful about him getting, counterplay, and I think the game should be more or less balanced, but there's a lot of fight left. So with this move rook d8, he basically throws away the game, and good job for finding this nice tactic. Rook takes, and now we have a little bit of combination. The fact that the rook is misplaced, you drive the king over to f7, and then after this fork, you simply win a piece. Now the rest is more or less technique, but let's just go over to see if you made any inaccuracies. I think this is all totally fine. You want to close up the game. I like the move g5. And then I like the way you're going for mate. Obviously, you could trade rooks and convert with an extra knight, but this is really sort of saying to your opponent, I'm not satisfied with the simple win. I'm going to try to checkmate you. So the combination of 2 knights and a rook is usually a good thing when you're attacking the lonely king, and that's exactly what happens in this game. Forget about the a pawn, forget about everything. You only focus about checkmate, and this is brilliant. I really like the way you smothered the king into the corner, and after this, there is simply no defense against mate, and that's why he resigned. So overall, an excellent game. You beat a much higher rated opponent, but a couple of things you have to watch out for is don't, give up the bishop pair early. Try to really save that bishop on d3, and watch out for those quiet tactics, right? After you take on f5, you had this opportunity to play this move knight b2. Other than that, I think you're playing great, so I want to see more of your games in the future. Thanks, and this was Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn for AskAGM.com.